TopMedTalk.
Well, welcome to TopMedTalk. I'm Desiree, Chappell, your host, and we are here at Anesthesiology 2022 in New Orleans, Louisiana, at booth 2245 in the exhibit hall. I'm joined by my co-host, Professor Monty Mythen. Hello, Monty.
Desiree, it's great to be here. Is this the home of jazz? Is that right?
It is.
Not
yes.
blues. That's Chicago, is it? No.
Jazz.
Jazz. Okay.
Actually, I just went to go listen to some jazz last night at Preservation Hall. Jazz.
I've been there in the past, a few years ago.
Fabulous.
Very wonderful. That's the trad stuff. That's the real deal.
It is the real deal, and we heard some real jazz last night. It was pretty amazing.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it was. Brought back some good memories. I've been going there my whole life. So if you haven't been to New Orleans, or you haven't been there, check it out. Monty, we can talk about New Orleans the whole time, but let's talk about TopMedTalk at Anesthesiology.
It's our fifth year of being at the ASA. This is now Anesthesiology 2022. We started at Boston, birthplace of anesthesia.
Yeah.
There we go. Celebrating that recently. Been at each ASA since, and I think our presence has matured over time.
I would say that.
To this, I said earlier the pinnacle, but the current pinnacle in our journey. This may be base camp, we don't know. But here with a very generous support of the American Society of Anesthesiology, we are here in partnership as TopMedTalk. So thank you very much.
Yes, we wanted to say thank you to the ASA so much for the booth. It is absolutely amazing. We've had some wonderful conversations, and all of this is to support TopMedTalk and our free medical education to the world.
Yeah, free open access medical education. As I keep saying, 100 countries around the world, many of whom would not have the possibility to listen if it wasn't for the generous support of the ASA and our wonderful industry partners.
That's right. We have had numerous partners over the years, and thank you to all of those. One of our partners is GE Healthcare. They've been involved, we've been involved in collaborations in the past. And so today we wanted to highlight another conversation that we had in a recording of our podcast with a group. We're checking back in with Dr. J.W. Beard. J.W., thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we have... we have Dr. Jeffery Feldman. I almost said the wrong name. I was like, I can't do that. Dr. Jeffery Feldman. Jeffery, for those who may not know you, can you give us a little bit about your background?
Sure, of course. So I'm a practicing anesthesiologist. I currently practice at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. I think my role here is in part representing the Patient Safety Foundation, the Anesthesia Patient Safety Foundation. So I'm on the board of directors. I chair the Committee on Technology, been involved in the organization for more than 20 years now, and just really passionate about the work that the APSF is able to do.
Yeah, for sure. Well, JW, Monty and I both were at the Stolting Conference, and you're Chief Medical Officer for GE Healthcare, right? But you also are really involved and very passionate about the APSF.
Yeah, I'm an anesthesiologist by training, 15 years of practice after I wrapped up my residency. One of the ways I first became involved with APSF was actually with a reported product malfunction in the field through I think it was called Dear Sirs at the time. Yep. And that happened in, I think, 2017 during an IV fluid shortage. And what had happened is that IV fluid shortage led to only larger volume bags being available, which were then attached to one of our IV infusion therapy products. And it led to that product being malpositioned and being reported as kind of a product malfunction to APSF. So I had an opportunity to work with Jeff directly there. I met that clinician who reported it at the ASA that year. And I've always been a fan of APSF. The newsletters I've always have found incredibly informative. And certainly the columns that Jeff has written over time have been a highlight of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, for those who are listening, we have a lot of anesthesia providers here in the U.S. and around the world. But tell us just a little bit more about the APSF, the Anesthesia Patient Safety Foundation. But tell us just a little bit more.
Yeah, and it's a foundation that started in the United States. It's the signature publication is the newsletter, which is now circulated globally.
It's one of the most read, if not the most read,
millions
newsletter in our space.
So hundreds of thousands of readers.
And translated into multiple
translated
languages.
Now into 8 languages. Russian and Arabic were added recently.
Right.
And so it's incredibly well circulated publication. focused on patient safety issues in the perioperative space. And so it's everywhere from pre-op to post-op to focused intra-op to review of specific complex technologies like implantable cardiac devices, etc. APSF also makes practice recommendations that are, I think they're produced and circulated widely enough, and the organization is so well respected that it really impacts practice, and it's become a very influential organization. And I'm happy to, we met at the Stolting Conference. I'm also very pleased to serve on the board of directors and the committee on technology also. Yeah. And so it's an organization that's very much worthy of the support of me and my role, and I think just clinicians globally.
For sure. Jeff, you've been involved with the organization for a while. What's your journey been there?
Well, it's interesting because it actually starts back to when I was a resident at the University of Florida. J.S. Gravenstein was my mentor, and he was one of the founders of the organization. Yeah. And so I kind of saw it forming, watching him in his office and putting it together, and never really dreaming that I would end up on the board of directors. But anyway, so I followed the organization for all these years, and the Committee on Technology is probably my most active role, curating a lot for the newsletter. The Rapid Response column, formerly Dear Sirs, is one of the most widely read, and it's really a highlight of the collaboration that we enjoy between clinicians and industry, because those articles are always a complaint or some sort of observation about a product, and we get the manufacturer involved in that dialogue. I think we make it very productive. But the other thing that I might add to what JW was talking about is, I think one of the really unique things about the APSF is we really embrace all anesthesia professionals. We're an apolitical organization, and so our goal really is empowering everyone at the bedside to do the safest care possible. And then we also reach out to the industry partners and people from Joint Commission, nursing organizations, whatever it takes to move patient safety forward, we're opening our arms. And
so it's never a blame game. It's a how do we work together to make the world a safer place.
Move things forward, absolutely. Yeah.
And the APSF really, they're walking the walk, because at the conference, whenever we were there were people from multidisciplinary groups, and different types of providers.
And they all had a voice.
And they all had a voice. Everyone had a part on the stage and presentations and conversation. It was a really wonderful experience. So kudos to you for living true to that mission.
Thank you. And it is very purposeful. And JW mentioned the practice recommendations. Yes. So just last February, we came out with some new recommendations around patient monitoring. And if we were to wait for the professional organizations to move forward with that, it's a very long process. It's not a critique. It's just part of their process. But what I like about being involved in the APSF is we can bring experts together. We can come up with opinions that are well considered, and then put recommendations out there that I think are really helpful to people in practice.
And where do those recommendations end up? Are they specifically targeted at hospitals or payers or providers, or is it just a sort of natural seepage of the sort of right ideas into the community? Do you see what I mean?
It's probably more the latter. I mean, we do publish it in the newsletter, so we get a lot of exposure with that. We do have a pretty active social media group in the APSF, and so that group is really good about getting information out. And I'm not a Facebook follower per se, but there are a lot of people that do follow the APSF that way. So we do have a good way to do outreach.
Yeah. Well, let's dive in a little bit to some of the recommendations that have been coming out of the technology committee.
So on the monitoring side, that's our most recent effort. It started about 3 or 4 years ago, actually, with one of our international committee members, Jan Hendricks. He came to one of the meetings with the observation that if you looked at monitoring recommendations from professional organizations around the world, they were very different. And, of course, patient physiology and safety considerations are not that different around the world. And there were some organizations that really were a little behind. And so we took a look at a comparative review of those things, tried to bring everybody up to the same playing field with our recommendations. I think specifically we really targeted recommendations around EEG monitoring because of concerns for awareness, particularly with intravenous anesthetics and patients who've received muscle relaxants. So we came out with very specific recommendations around that. Neuromuscular blockade monitoring has been a mission of the APSF for some time. Yes. And so we came out with very specific recommendations that you should always do that when you're using a relaxant, and preferably with a quantitative device. And we're going to be doing some more work around that going forward. And then there were some other lapses. For example, in the United States, anesthetic concentration monitoring was not considered a standard. And so we've tried to move that bar if we can with our recommendations.
Because I'm sort of old enough to remember the minimal monitoring standards coming in.
Yeah.
And what was that, the 80s?
The late 80s, yeah.
80, yeah. Which was started with, it's a good idea if you stay in the room. that seriously wasn't. I'm not joking.
No, it's right. Got to crawl before you can walk.
Exactly, and it went on to say, end-tidal CO2 monitoring, ECG, blood pressure, pulse oximetry, which then became a standard, which was good for everybody.
Yeah.
And I think that did become globalized. But there's so much has happened in between. As you say,
absolutely.
that we're kind of, standard, not standard.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting conundrum because when you apply the word standard, that's pretty potent. And so people say, well, we should have evidence if we're going to call it a standard. Well, you may know that there was a randomized controlled trial of pulse oximetry performed in the early 90s, and they were unable to show a positive outcome difference, yet you'd have to pry that device from my cold dead hands, So, it's a difficult problem to prove with research, but I think you get enough experts in the room and you can make good, rational decisions for patient care, and that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah. You mentioned the last recommendation on anesthetic gas monitoring. Talk to us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so it's not a requirement in some of the U.S. standards that anesthetic gases be monitored. It's very clear that it's one way to prevent awareness is to actually monitor the concentration of the anesthetic. We know that there's been problems with empty vaporizers and delivery systems. And then as you get further along and you start to talk about low-flow anesthesia, if you're going to do that safely and effectively, you need to monitor the anesthetic concentration, the inhaled anesthetic. So there's lots of good reasons to really consider that a requirement. And many machines are built in with it now. It's built in, but there are also a lot of models where it's not part of the device, and you have to purposely buy a monitor that has that feature. And hopefully that's what people are doing.
Integrating that more.
Have got so used to that being normal. I'm surprised to hear that in some places it's not normal. Have you seen places where it's not normal?
Yeah, I mean it's pretty basic, some of the things, the technology that we've been living with, machines.
Yeah, I mean, we're hoping it's more the exception than the rule, but certainly when you go into some locations, now that we've got NORA anesthesia exploding, as we know from the recent Stolten conference, and now we're putting...
And what's that? Sorry, NORA?
Thank you. It's non-operating room anesthesia, and so you're going into environments where it's difficult to fit a machine. Maybe the old machine that you got out of the operating room is ending up there. And, do you put an agent monitor on there? Well, maybe not. And so, we're really, every anesthetizing location should have that capability.
I touched on this in the conference, that reading our guidelines in the UK, we sort of said, look, an anesthetic is an anesthetic is an anesthetic. So we're not sure about these excuses about the fact the space is a bit small.
Of course. Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. Well, gentlemen, anything else with those guidelines that you really wanted to highlight?
I think, on Jeff, on the neuromuscular blockade monitoring recommendation, I believe we settled on use a monitor and didn't try to say use a monitor and it needs to be quantitative.
For the neuromuscular blockade?
Yep.
Yes.
Correct.
And what was our rationale there for... Because I think the quantitative monitoring has been shown, I think, superior in really being able to represent the state of the antagonism, the reversal of the relaxant.
Yep.
But I think is it just trying to get from really inconsistent practice to at least something?
So there's that. We don't want it to be a barrier to say only use quantitative, and then people say, well, I can't do that, so I'm not going to do anything. But also the quantitative technology is still a little bit early in its growth, and I think there's adoption. There's two different technologies now that are kind of acceleration based and EMG based, and sort of vying for which one is going to become the accepted one. And now there's, you have a user gap, an education gap, which actually the APSF is trying to fill. If I can talk for a minute about that.
Yeah.
So this year we launched the first course in the APSF Technology Education Initiative. So apsf.org/TEI will get you to that website.
Yeah.
And our first course is on low flow anesthesia, and it went live this weekend at the meeting.
Great.
And very excited about it. It's guided simulation. We partnered with the University of Florida Simulation Group. So you find a simulated representation of the anesthesia delivery system. There are models for uptake of oxygen and anesthetic, and allows you to envision a practice that you would do in the operating room in a simulation environment.
Gotcha.
And we take people through all the principles of low flow anesthesia. Our course next year is going to be on neuromuscular blockade monitoring, specifically quantitative neuromuscular blockade monitoring. We expect that to release also at this conference next year.
Wow, congratulations. I mean, that's absolutely phenomenal. We will definitely put that in the show notes too, the link to that.
Yeah.
So this educational material, which includes this simulator, has an incredible visual. And so to me, it really makes the point of how rebreathing gas affects the inspired concentration of gas. It's not enough to, best practice is to deliver low flow anesthesia. Adjusting your fresh gas flow and your anesthetic, that is not the FI of the anesthetic or the oxygen. It is mixing with the rebreathing gas. And that's the gas flow and the vaporizer, that's the delivered, and it's mixing with this kind of rebreathed gas, and that's becoming your inspired concentration. And I thought that visual, when I saw it yesterday actually, is really nicely represents that. I think it's an excellent educational tool.
How are you planning to scale that? Because that's going to be very popular.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we hope so. And actually, so it is, so I want to just emphasize, it's available to all anesthesia professionals. The course itself, there's an entry page on the APSF website with a lot of information, but the course itself is hosted on the ASA website for CME purposes.
Yes.
Oh, great.
But you do not have to be an ASA member. You don't have to be a physician. Nurses, anesthesia assistants, anyone that wants to take the course can create an account and have access to it. And it's delivered in 8 different topics. Each one takes about 15 minutes. You can come and go and do one and then come back the next day. And it really covers all the essence of low flow anesthesia, and it's free of charge.
That is
Wow.
fantastic.
That's excellent.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us and sitting down on the couch and having this conversation. Enlightening for sure. The APSF is such an important organization within perioperative medicine and definitely within our anesthesia space. Congratulate you for all the work that you've done, because we all know that it's a lot of work inside of the desk a lot of the times. And so it's just been wonderful. We'll make sure we'll have all that in the show notes so we can drive people to that new educational resource.
That would be great.
Yeah.
Thanks you for the opportunity.
And if you don't know the APSF for some reason, get the newsletter.
Absolutely.
It's a great read.
Yes.
I think it is the most read
Yeah.
thing in our space around the world.
And that's also available for free. You go to the APSF
Yes.
website, you sign up, it comes to your email,
Yeah.
no charge.
And now you said 8 languages?
That's correct.
Right,
Yeah.
8 languages. You don't have to
Anesthesia
speak them all
Patient
to read
Safety
it, but-
Foundation. Yes, absolutely. All right.
TopMedTalk.
Gentlemen, thank you. Thank you so much for listening to TopMedTalk. Again, we've had great conversations throughout this entire meeting, other conversations that we've had with GE about the topics, some topics of interest over the last year at TopMedTalk.com. Again, check out our live stream during Anesthesiology 2022 live.topmedtalk.com. Cheers.